Sacrifice and success. My path to becoming a doctor in a foreign land. A dream. Born in a small village. I was born in a small village where dreams often seemed too big for the small life we had. The village was quiet, surrounded by green fields, and everyone knew each other. My family wasn't rich. We lived in a small house with a tin roof that would make loud noises when it rained. My father worked as a farmer, and my mother was a teacher in the village school. Although we didn't have much, there was one thing my parents gave me. That money couldn't buy: hope. From a very young age, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. It wasn't because I liked the idea of wearing a white coat or holding a stethoscope around my neck. It was because I wanted to help people. I remember seeing a local doctor come to our village once every few months. The way he helped people, how they looked at him with respect and gratitude, touched me deeply. I saw him save lives, and in my small heart, I made a promise to myself that one day I would do the same. But there was a problem. In my village, not many people went on to higher education, and fewer still had the chance to study medicine. The road to becoming a doctor seemed long, difficult, and full of obstacles. I didn't have the money for fancy schools or special coaching classes. There were no tutors to help me, and the internet was something most people in my village didn't even understand. Still, the dream didn't leave me. The decision to leave. When I was 18 after finishing high school, my dream began to feel like it was slipping away. The only option I saw was to stay in the village and find a job that could help my family. But deep inside, I knew that if I gave up now, I would regret it forever. So, after many sleepless nights, I made the hardest decision of my life: to leave my village and go to a foreign land to study medicine. The decision wasn't easy. My parents were heartbroken. They had never been far from home, and the thought of me leaving scared them. "Why go so far away? Why not study here?" my mother would ask, tears in her eyes. But I explained that in our country, there were limited opportunities for someone like me, and studying medicine required resources that we didn't have. "This is my chance, Mom. I have to try. I promise I'll make you proud," I said, holding back my own tears. Leaving my family and my home was one of the hardest things I've ever done. The day I left, my father, who rarely showed emotions, gave me a long hug. "You're doing the right thing," he whispered. "We might not have much, but we have belief in you." The struggles of being an outsider. I arrived in the foreign country with nothing but a suitcase and a heart full of dreams. The first days were full of excitement, but soon the reality of being away from home hit me. I didn't know anyone. The language barrier was huge, and even simple tasks like buying food or asking for directions felt impossible. The cultural differences were also overwhelming. In my country, people would greet each other with warm smiles and hugs. But here, everything was more formal. I felt isolated. I missed my family, my friends, and even the simple sounds of my village. There were moments when I wanted to go back. But then I remembered my parents' faces, their sacrifices, and my own promise to them. To make matters worse, the cost of living was much higher than I had expected. I had to take up part-time jobs just to pay for my rent and food. I worked at a cafe during the day and cleaned offices at night. I would come home exhausted, but still, I couldn't let go of my dream. Every time I sat down to study, I reminded myself, this is the price of success. You have to keep going. Despite all of these challenges, I focused on my studies. I would wake up early and study late into the night. Sometimes I felt like giving up. I saw other students from wealthy families who didn't have to worry about money or language. They had tutors and extra help. I felt behind, like I was fighting a battle I wasn't sure I could win. But I kept going. I knew that nothing worth achieving comes easily, so I pushed myself harder. Every time I failed a test, I studied harder. Every time I felt alone, I reminded myself of my purpose. I wasn't just studying for myself. I was studying for my family, for my village, and for everyone who believed in me. A glimpse of hope. It wasn't until my second year that things started to change. Slowly, I began to adapt. My English improved, and I made a few friends who were also international students. We shared our struggles and our dreams. It felt good to know I wasn't the only one facing challenges. We helped each other, and that support made a huge difference. One of my professors noticed my hard work. He had seen me stay late in the library, always studying, always trying to improve. One day, after class, he called me into his office. "You're doing well, but I see you struggle. You don't have to do this alone," he said. His words meant more to me than I can explain. From that moment, he became my mentor. He helped me with my studies, gave me advice, and even connected me with internships in hospitals. This support changed everything. I began to understand the subjects better, and I felt more confident. I was no longer just a foreigner struggling to survive. I was a student, someone who was on the path to becoming a doctor. The first big sacrifice. As I moved closer to finishing my degree, I realized that there was another challenge waiting for me. My family back home needed money. My father had fallen ill, and my mother was struggling to take care of everything alone. They had sacrificed so much for me to be here. But now it was my turn to help them. I was faced with a difficult choice. Should I continue my studies, or should I go back home to help my family? After many sleepless nights, I decided to stay. I knew that the only way I could truly help my family was by completing my studies and becoming a doctor. It wasn't an easy choice, but it was the right one. I worked even harder, taking on extra shifts at my part-time jobs and sending money home whenever I could. It was difficult to balance everything, but the thought of my family kept me going. I knew they were counting on me. The final push. As my years in medical school went by, I encountered more obstacles, but I also grew stronger. Each year, I felt closer to my goal, but the road was still filled with challenges. The workload increased, and I often felt like I was juggling too many things at once. It wasn't just about exams anymore. It was about understanding complex medical concepts and learning how to treat real patients. I had to spend long hours in the hospital, often missing meals or sleep. I'd work with real doctors, watching them diagnose patients, perform surgeries, and provide care. It was both inspiring and exhausting. I wanted to be just like them, but I knew I had to put in years of effort before I could reach that point. But something deep inside me kept pushing me forward. I had faced so many difficulties in these few years: language barriers, cultural differences, loneliness, and financial struggles. But the dream was always bigger than my problems. It was a light at the end of a long tunnel, and I was getting closer. One day, in the middle of my fourth year, I received an email that would change everything. It was from the hospital where I had been working part-time. They were offering me a full-time position as an assistant. I couldn't believe it. I was still in medical school, but this opportunity would give me the hands-on experience I needed. However, the position would require me to work even more hours, which meant less time for studying. It felt like I was being pulled in two directions. I was torn between the chance to work in the hospital, which would be invaluable experience, and the need to focus on my studies to pass my exams. The pressure of it all was almost unbearable. I spent a week thinking it over. My family needed me, yes, but my future as a doctor was also at stake. After many discussions with my mentor and some sleepless nights, I made the decision to take the job. I figured that if I could balance work and study, this would be the final step toward achieving my dream. But that was when the real test began. Juggling work and study. Working full-time in the hospital, while also studying for exams, was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Some days, I felt like I was losing control. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., get ready for the hospital, and work until the late evening. Then, I would go home and try to study for the exams that were approaching. By the time I reached my bed at night, I was exhausted, physically and mentally. There were days when I would feel completely overwhelmed. I would stare at my textbooks, but my mind would be too tired to focus. I remember one night I sat on my bed and cried. I asked myself, is this worth it? Will I ever make it through? But then I thought of my parents. I thought of the sacrifices they made for me. I thought of the villagers who had believed in me, and the children in my village who would one day look up to me as a role model. That thought was enough to push me forward. I couldn't give up now. Not when I'd come so far. I created a schedule, dividing my time carefully between work, study, and rest. Every free moment I had, I used it to learn something new. I couldn't waste a second. There were still many obstacles to face. During my final year, I had to prepare for my licensing exams, which were the final step before becoming a doctor. I was not only competing against students from my university, but also students from all over the world who had the same goal. I had to work harder than ever. Every day felt like a marathon. But I knew that this was the moment when all my sacrifices would pay off. Graduation day. The day I graduated, I couldn't believe it was real. After years of hard work, sleepless nights, and countless sacrifices, I had finally achieved my dream. I stood in my graduation gown, holding my diploma in my hands, feeling the weight of all the struggles I had endured. But it wasn't just the graduation day that meant so much to me. It was the journey. I had spent so many years far from home, away from my family, and yet I was standing there, a doctor. I thought about everything I had overcome, being alone in a foreign country, the loneliness, the financial struggles, the work, the constant pressure. It had all been worth it. When I called my parents to tell them that I had graduated, I could hear the joy and pride in their voices. My mother was crying, and my father, who rarely showed emotion, was laughing with happiness. "You did it! You've become a doctor," they said. I thanked them, not just for the sacrifices they had made, but for their unwavering belief in me. Their belief had been my strength during the hardest times. But even though the degree was in my hand, I knew that my journey wasn't over. Now, I had to return home and put my skills to work. I had to help the people who had supported me. I had to give back to my community and bring hope to those who needed it most. The return home. Returning home was an emotional experience. When I stepped off the plane, I could smell the familiar scent of the air, and my heart swelled with a sense of belonging. My village was the same, yet it felt different. I had changed. I had seen the world, and I had learned so much. When I entered the village, and it felt like a dream. People gathered around me, calling me doctor. It was overwhelming, but it was also humbling. I had been just like them, dreaming of a better future, and now I was living it. I began working in the local clinic, helping the people in my community. The patients I saw were different from those I had treated abroad, but they had the same needs, the same hopes. I treated them with the same care and compassion I had learned in the hospital. I knew that my work was just beginning. There were many more challenges to face, but I was ready. I also realized that my journey wasn't just about becoming a doctor, it was about the people who helped me get there. My family, my mentor, my friends, and even the strangers who gave me support when I needed it most. They had all played a part in my success. The lesson learned. Looking back on everything, I learned that success is not just about achieving your goals. It's about the sacrifices you make, the obstacles you overcome, and the people who help you along the way. It's about staying true to your dreams, even when the path seems impossible. Becoming a doctor in a foreign land was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most rewarding. And the best part? I knew I could make a difference in the world, one patient at a time. The funny side of being a doctor. As I settled into my new life as a doctor back in my village, I quickly realized that being a doctor wasn't all serious business. There were moments that made me laugh, moments that made me feel human, and moments when I truly appreciated the joy of my work. One day I walked into the clinic, ready for another busy day of seeing patients. The waiting room was full, as usual. I sat down to begin my rounds when an elderly man, Mr. Shamsher, came in. He had a funny look on his face as he sat down across from me. "Doctor, I have a problem," he said in a very serious tone. I looked at him with concern. "What's the problem, Mr. Shamsher?" He sighed dramatically. "I can't remember anything. I have no memory. No memory at all." I was about to offer him some advice when he paused and looked around the room. Then, with a twinkle in his eye, he added, "But don't tell my wife. She'll remind me every single day that I forgot something." I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, Mr. Shamsher, maybe it's not a memory problem, but a wife problem." We both laughed, and for a moment it felt like everything was lighter. The pressures of being a doctor, the endless responsibility, it all seemed to fade in that moment of shared humor. Sometimes laughter was the best medicine. The patients who came to me with their serious health problems always appreciated my care. But I soon realized that my village wasn't just looking for a doctor. They were looking for someone who could bring a little warmth and humor into their lives. One day, a young boy came in with his mother. The boy looked nervous, staring at the medical equipment in the corner, especially the thermometer. As I approached him with a smile, I saw him glance at the thermometer and then at me. He seemed to be sizing me up. "Don't worry," I said, trying to reassure him. "It's just a thermometer. It doesn't bite." The boy blinked, then whispered to his mother, "Does he have magic powers like the doctors on TV?" I smiled and knelt down to his level. "Maybe I do," I said, holding up my stethoscope. "I can even hear your heart talking to me. Want to hear it?" The boy's eyes went wide. "Really?" "Really," I said. "Your heart is saying, 'Please, stop making me run around all day and let me rest.'" He burst into giggles. It was moments like these that made the tough days worthwhile. Helping patients didn't always have to be about serious treatment. It was about building trust, making them feel comfortable, and making them smile. The unexpected challenges. Despite the light moments, my journey didn't end with my return to the village. There were still challenges I had to face. Being a doctor wasn't just about treating patients. It was about constantly learning and improving. I found that even though I had completed my studies abroad, I still had a lot to learn. The medical world was always changing, and there were new treatments, techniques, and technologies to keep up with. One afternoon, I received a call from a neighboring town about a patient who needed surgery. The problem was that they didn't have the resources to do it properly, and they wanted me to come help. I agreed to go, even though I was nervous. This would be my first real surgery outside of the training I had received. When I arrived at the hospital, I was taken to the operating room. There were nurses and doctors ready to assist, but the equipment was old. It felt like I had stepped back in time. I had become used to high-tech equipment and modern tools in the hospitals abroad, but this was different. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of everything I had learned. "Focus. You can do this," I thought. The surgery started, and at first everything seemed to go smoothly. But then the equipment began to fail. Lights flickering, the suction machine making strange noises, and the monitor showing odd readings. I could feel the tension in the room, but then one of the nurses cracked a joke. "Well, doctor, if the machine fails, We'll just have to use magic. You do have those powers, right? We all laughed, and suddenly the stress lifted a bit. With the teamwork of everyone in the room, we were able to make the surgery a success. By the end of the day, I was exhausted. But as I looked at the patient's family, who were waiting anxiously outside, and saw their smiles of relief, I knew that despite the challenges, I had made the right choice to be a doctor. A full circle moment. Months passed, and I continued to work in my clinic, learning more each day, handling all sorts of medical cases, and becoming more comfortable in my role. However, one of the most rewarding moments of my career came unexpectedly. It was a rainy afternoon, and I was just about to leave the clinic when I saw a familiar face at the door. It was a young woman named Zara, who had been a patient of mine a few years ago. She had come in with a severe illness, and I had treated her for months. I had almost forgotten about her, but there she was, standing at the door with a big smile on her face. "Doctor, do you remember me?" she asked, her eyes full of gratitude. I nodded, trying to place her face. "Of course I do. How are you?" She held up her baby, who was now about 2 years old. "This is my son, Yusuf. I wanted to bring him here so you could see that he's perfectly healthy, thanks to you." It was a full circle moment for me. All the struggles, all the sleepless nights, and the sacrifices, it had all led to this point. I wasn't just a doctor in a foreign land anymore. I was someone who had changed lives, who had given people hope. Zara thanked me again and left. But as I stood there, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. This was why I had become a doctor. Not for the fancy title, not for the money or the prestige, but to make a real difference in the lives of people. The true meaning of success. As I sit here today, reflecting on my journey, I realize that success isn't just about reaching the top of your career. It's about the people you help along the way, the sacrifices you make, and the lessons you learn from every obstacle you face. The road to becoming a doctor in a foreign land wasn't easy. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the pressure felt too much, when I was so far from home and from the people I loved. But I never stopped believing in my dream, and I never gave up. And the best part of all? I got to come back home, not just as a doctor, but as someone who had made a real impact in the lives of the people who had supported me all along. So, if you're reading this and you're facing your own struggles, whether it's pursuing a career, chasing a dream, or overcoming a challenge, remember this: the sacrifices are hard, but the rewards are worth it. And sometimes, the most meaningful moments in life come from the people you meet, the lessons you learn, and the laughter that makes the tough times a little easier. That's the end of the story. I hope it was engaging and gave a little humor alongside the deep lessons. Let me know if you need any more adjustments or want me to add anything further. Don't forget to subscribe our channel as we work very for making those best English learning stories for you.